Hello everybody. If you're a petrolhead on the hunt for a sports car that delivers back to basics motoring, it may feel as if your choice for something reasonably new is getting smaller with every passing day. That is, unless you have a budget in the millions, in which case things have never been better. However, there is some good news because back in 2017, Renault shocked us all. They revived the Alpine marque to bring us this, the A110, and it was a car that scores highly on the petrolhead want list. After all, it was a car that Renault said would deliver big thrills at lower speeds with a modest price point and a focus on all the stuff us petrolheady types say we like. So, not ludicrous power numbers, low weight, and the sort of driver involvement that today is oft forgotten. However, as Toyota found out a few years ago, giving the people what they want doesn't always mean that they'll buy it. So, even though it's been around for a few years now, an Alpine is still a rare sight on our roads. The future of the Alpine company and the A110 itself has been in a state of near constant peril the entire time it's been on sale. However, in recent times we have had some good news, and it looks though Alpine may have a future. However, the same cannot necessarily be said for the A110. So, in honour of this car's 5th anniversary, I'm going to be giving you 5 reasons why you may wish to make space on your driveway for an A110. And of course, a few reasons you might want to stay clear of that Renault dealer. Let's go. We may as well start with the good stuff, the really good stuff. The Alpine is a very different kind of car, and I'm the sort of person that's always celebrated different. However, being different on its own is not enough to justify prying open your wallet. A car needs to be different in a good way, and the Alpine really is. You realise just how different the Alpine is the moment you try and find something to compare it to. After all, that's what us journalists are supposed to do. Find a car that sits in the same segment and see how it differs. But the fact is, the Alpine is in a class of its own. After all, let's take one of the obvious comparisons, a Lotus Elise. Yeah, sure, both are lightweight, aluminium sports cars with a focus on driver involvement. But this has a lot more features, tech, interior space, and a double-clutch gearbox. Then on the other hand, you could say, okay, well, what about a Porsche Cayman? That's also a 50-odd thousand pound two-seater coupe with an engine in the middle. But that also is a very different flavour of car that will appeal to a very different person. There truly is no direct rival for an Alpine. And that's a bold move. After all, just ask Alfa Romeo. With the 4C, they weren't even trying something as brave as this. They were simply trying to make an Elise alternative. However, what they wound up with was a car that had the price of a Porsche, the interior quality that a Lotus owner would sniff at, and handling of an uncooperative shopping trolley when shown a bumpy road. In fact, I'm pretty convinced if it wasn't drop-dead gorgeous, they wouldn't have sold a single one. Somehow Alpine, despite being a dormant brand for many years now and owned by a parent which has never really cared for sports cars, have cracked it. They have combined the best parts of a Lotus Elise and a Porsche Cayman to create something which really is truly special. And indeed, pretty much everything about this car is halfway between those two. At around 1100 kilos, the Alpine may be 200 more than a Lotus Elise, but here's a car that has a complete interior, an automatic gearbox that works. You can hear yourself think. It has noise insulation, screens that work, all sorts of modern creature comforts that Lotus has done without for a very long time in their entry-level models. On the other hand, a Porsche Cayman doesn't really seem to have anything more than this, yet is over 200 kilos heavier. Second, this car is a tribute to the glorious twin pillars of simplicity and tradition. All of the performance and lightweight in this car has been achieved through good old-fashioned engineering and only giving you what you need and nothing more. So we have a bespoke aluminium bonded and riveted lightweight chassis, just like in a Lotus. 96% of it is aluminium. You have double wishbone suspension, front and rear, just like in a Lotus. You have a flat underbody and functional diffuser, just like in a Lotus. You have passive but well-tuned dampers like in a Lotus, and you have an engine in the middle like a Ferrari. Gotcha. No, this is a 1.8 litre turbocharged 4, so I suppose in that regard it's a small engine in the back from a front-wheel drive car. That's a bit like a Lotus, and it's worth pointing out that more or less nothing in the engineering department of this car is taken from anything else. This really is a bespoke creation. Though to be fair, that shouldn't really be a surprise. After all, you weren't expecting there to be a Megane lurking under all of this, were you? That theme continues inside, where Alpine have given you everything that a 21st century sports car owner expects and nothing more. So you have a small digital display here that supports Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, and to be fair, though it's not flashy, actually works quite well. Likewise, the digital dash here. It's basic, it's simple, but gives you all the information you need and not a drop more. Down here, you'll find single zone climate control. Been a while since I've seen that in a car of this price point, but unlike many others, it's simple, it's easy to use. There are just 2 dials, a few buttons, and between them, you've got every function covered. Then you have these beautiful Saybelt fixed bucket seats. They move that way, and they'll move that way too. That's it. Though if you do need more adjustment or a little more comfort, you can get optional 6-way adjustable items. In all fairness, I don't really see the need. These are absolutely sensational. They do make you feel like you're sat a touch too high, but look at them and you'll see Alpine have mounted them just about as low as they will go. This central tunnel also puts all the major driving controls within easy reach. So you have down here your parking brake and, confusingly, some cruise control functionality. The start-stop button, the big red one, kind of hard to miss. Above that, window switches, and then the gearbox controls, followed by a small little pouch that I think is meant for your key. On the wheel, likewise, you have some very basic controls for cruise control that remind me quite a bit of those in my Lotus Evora. And then this, an absolute delight. One button to control all the driving modes. It just says Sport, though there is actually another that I'll discuss on the road. One of the mistakes that I think Alfa Romeo made with the 4C was charging a huge amount on account of the fact that car had a carbon tub, and then kind of forgetting to spend any money elsewhere. You sit in a 4C and it feels like a very, very cheap car. The Alpine is very different from that. Okay, sure, there are a few little oddities in here, like this little stereo controller that I absolutely hate because it feels like it's from a 1990s Renault Traffic. Same for the mirror adjusters here, they seem to have come off a cheap Clio. But that I can entirely forgive because the overall ambiance is one of quality. I like this car, and there are some genuinely nice touches, like these leather door pulls, the little diamond quilted section here with the French tricolore on it, the little shift paddles that are mounted to the column rather than the wheel like something Italian, and, though it is an option, this cute little storage bin between the seats, which is even quilt lined. But sadly, it's also in here that I have to mention some of the first reasons you may wish to steer clear of an Alpine. A lot of thought has evidently gone into making this a car you could use every day, but there are a few curious omissions. The first being, there's no cup holder in here. There are several places that look like there might be a cup holder, but in fact are not. My least favourite being the little bit back here that is in fact just the right width to grab a McDonald's cup by the top lid, but not the base. That's borderline dangerous. Likewise, this little section here, which is where your mobile phone plugs in. From here, I can see and access it easily. Once I'm sat in the car, it's near impossible to get to. And like a Cayman, for its size, this car actually has a surprising amount of storage. Depending on how tall you are, you may be able to get stuff behind the seats, but there's also a small boot at the rear and a fruit up front. The boot at the rear is easy to get into via a button just below it. However, it's a slightly awkward size and shape. The front is far more uniform and to me, much more useful. However, to get into it is far trickier than it should be. I spent 10 minutes trying to work out how you open it, standing there, pressing the key, looking for a button, because surely there must have been an easy way. But no, the only way to get into that is to open the passenger door and pull a lever in the footwell, which is ridiculous. If there were an engine up front, fine, but there's not. That's one of your major storage spaces. And even Ferrari learned you need to get into the boot frequently 20 years ago. For a modern day car, that's a bizarre oversight. I'm sure it's a right-hand drive specific issue, but it's also something Alpine should have sorted. And now, back to more good stuff. Point 3, the price. A base Alpine A110 starts at 10 quid shy of 50 grand. This example, as tested, is £54,144. Though that sounds like a fair chunk of money, in the world of the bespoke sports car, it's actually not. To give you some frame of reference, a Lotus Elise Cup 250 would have cost you a similar amount, and that was for a car that gives you a lot less inside, was built on a very old platform, and that was before options. Bear in mind, when you're talking about a Lotus Elise, options include things like a stereo or air conditioning. Sure, for similar money you could get yourself a 718 Cayman, but the simple fact is one of those is not going to come with much as standard, and let's be honest here, it's nowhere near as special as this. Nor is a BMW M240, which is also about the same money and sure has a lot more power, but I think far from the head-turning ability of the Alpine. Fourth, and I cannot state this enough, it's not a Porsche. That may sound like a horrible thing to say as a positive, but it's true. Don't get me wrong, I love Porsche, I've owned a few, and I relish every chance I get to drive one, be it a 924 or a Carrera GT. Though the chance would be a fine thing. However, you also cannot deny that in the past 2 decades, a lot has been done to dilute the brand. Particularly with the introduction of the Cayenne and the Macan, a Porsche is no longer the special thing it once was. You should be greeted with, wow, or that's amazing when you tell someone you drive a Porsche. Instead, these days, you're likely to get a, yeah, that's decent, that's all right, especially if you're talking to a petrol head. You're never going to get that with one of these. This has a serious wow factor about it, the sort of thing that even a Ferrari or Lamborghini owner cannot hope to achieve. I would say the only brands that come close would be those like TVR, Lotus, and perhaps Maserati. Alpines are special things, be they old or new. And if you're the sort of person that loves talking to others about cars, get yourself an Alpine, because this is exactly the sort of thing that turns a quick stop at a petrol station into a half-hour adventure where you'll make plenty of new friends. I love cars like that. For me, it's one of the best things about owning something interesting and unusual. You also know the sort of person that bought an Alpine is one that doesn't really care about brand snobbery. They're the kind of person that buys a car because it makes them feel good, not because they want the neighbours to be jealous. And I have a lot of time for that. And believe me, as a driving experience, one of these is far better than many a Cayman, not just the base one. But let's be fair and give the Porsche crowd a bit of ammunition to fight back, shall we, and talk about another one of this car's weak points. It is, in fact, right here, because it's the engine. Not only can you not see it, but it's also not very exciting. And I mean that in just about every way conceivable. It's a 1.8 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder, as you'd find in the Renault Sport Megane 280. However, here, it doesn't make 280 horsepower. It makes 252. There are models above this, the A110S and the A110 GT, the S being the sportier one and the GT being the more luxury-orientated one. Those both make 300 horses, which this really should have from day one. But, truth be told, with just 1,100 kilos to pull, this actually does the business. However, it just does not excite. It's not particularly tuneful, nor does it rush for the red line. Torque is just about okay, 240-ish pound-foot, depending on which car you have. That's about 320 or 340 newton meters. But I'm just not wowed by it. I will also confess that it bugs me a lot more than it probably should that this is a 1.8 and not just a 2 litre. It's a real shame even in the Megane Sport, but here it's totally unforgivable. This is all thanks to France's rather punitive horsepower taxes, which came around after the Second World War and then were a fairly good idea, but in the decades since haven't really done much beyond stopping France making some great sports cars. That's a shame, because I think they've got it in them. And while I'm bashing the engine, I may as well take a pop at the gearbox too. Here, your sole transmission option is a 7-speed DCT, as seen in the Renault Sport Megane, which curiously also had the option of a manual, something you do not get here. The fact is, I expect this was a compromise necessary to get this car made at all. Though I can understand it, it still is frustrating, because I expect your prime kind of buyer for this sort of car isn't so much people coming from Porsche, but instead those coming from Lotus. People that until recently have been buying an Elise and aren't really happy with what the Emira is offering. Those are likely to be people that like the idea of a naturally aspirated or supercharged engine paired with a manual gearbox. Though the turbo, I think people will be able to see past, the lack of a manual is likely to frustrate and may cost Alpine a few sales. But in the grand scheme of things, I suppose it was always going to be this way. Now here's where things get tricky for me as a journalist. Because this is a driver-focused sports car, there is clearly a lot you don't expect it to have, and I therefore can't criticise it for lacking. For example, you don't expect it to have soft closed doors, and it does not. You don't expect it to have double glazing, nor apparently do you expect it to have cup holders. But as you've sacrificed all of this luxury, what you do expect is a driving experience like almost no other. And that's a problem for Alpine, because the two cars I'm talking about, the Lotus Elise and the Porsche Cayman, have built their reputation on being great to drive. So how does this fare in such esteemed company? Well, as you can probably tell by the fact my hair is even scruffier and I'm wearing yet another of my fabulous Claudio Lugli shirts, it's been a few days since I recorded my introduction. In that time, I have covered several hundreds of miles in the little Alpine through a variety of different conditions and on a number of different roads. During that time, it's also garnered many comments of approval and thumbs up from all who see it, including my friend Jack from the channel number 27, who cursed me when I turned up in this because he said I brought just about the only modern car that actually excited him. That was a comment repeated by several people when I took it to the iDriver Classic meet hosted by Steph over at Gilk's Garage Cafe, one of my favourite automotive-themed venues. If you happen to be in the Warwick area and need a bite or a drink, I highly recommend it, and if you like older cars too, please check out Steph's channel. I am absolutely delighted to report that the Alpine is filled with all the magic that made it so memorable when I drove it first all those years ago. However, there was, I will admit, a moment of panic because when I first got into this car, took it down the road, I went, oh no. Oh no. You see, what I recalled about this car as being so special, and many others did too, was the way that it rode. It could carry speed across a bumpy piece of tarmac in a way alien to just about anything else not wearing a Lotus badge. However, the first few miles in this car, I just thought, they've ruined it. Around town and at low speeds, this car is much harsher than you would imagine, particularly when you consider it's wearing only 18-inch wheels, hallelujah, and those are shod with Pilot Sport 4 tyres in very modest sizes, 205s up front, 235s at the back, yet it rides with a firmness not exactly unlike the McLaren 675 LT that I also drove yesterday. I was genuinely concerned that at some point in the production run, someone complained to Alpine and said, no, it's too soft, we don't like this comfort nonsense, make it nice and stiff like all the other sports cars out there, and that they'd ruined it. Happily though, this is not the case at all. Instead, this is merely a byproduct of Alpine's choice to fit this car with high quality but passive dampers. There is simply a limit to what they can do. And we'll talk more about exactly what they can do in a few minutes. But before that, some more of the boring stuff. Across a long journey, the car will average something like 35 to the gallon if you're on the motorway. That's not spectacular for just a 1.8 litre turbocharged engine in a car that weighs so little and surely is fairly slippery. However, when combined with a 45 litre fuel tank, it does mean you can actually cruise a fairly long distance in this between fill-ups. Truthfully, the most frustrating part of the entire ownership experience has been that boot release handle for the front. That really is it, because the rest of the package is pretty sensational. Even that engine, though it isn't spectacular nor very sonorous, does the job and gets the car up to speed pretty quickly. To get the car into manual mode, either pull a paddle, which will enable it temporarily, or press the D button down here and then it will be set permanent. It does amuse me that put the car into manual and the D will go blue, a little nod to the French tricolor, which you see a lot through this car. If you put the car in park, which you can do by holding the neutral button, that will then go red and the reverse light stays white. That's new, and I tell you why that is, that's my camera at the front. You'll also find the tricolor down here on the dash, here on the door, outside as well, and I'm pretty sure I've missed some others too. Alright, that's the traffic lights dealt with. Let's have some fun. The drive mode selector in this car is simplicity itself. Because this car has those passive dampers, there is no difference in ride quality no matter what setting you're in. To get into sport is fairly easy. Simply press the button, the dash will change into a slightly different layout, the steering will get a little heavier, and the mapping for the gearbox and throttle also change. Though I'm not a particularly big fan of the engine, I have to say I love the gearbox, and the two work together really well. Sure, there's always a little bit of turbo lag, but it is consistent, so even in manual mode, it never really gets in the way. Sport also introduces a little bit of the old pops and cracks, but never enough really to frustrate, and if you don't like them, just put it into normal mode, because to be fair, the gear shifts seem nearly as good anyway. It really is sensational, that gearbox. When left to its own devices, it'll change down effectively, and also has the good sense to know when simply leaving the car in gear is actually the right option. Alright, let's try my 3-point turn hill start torture test. Turning circle, yeah, not too bad for a sports car. Car goes into reverse quite easily. It sounds like a siren because I've got a camera at the front which is fouling one of the parking sensors. Has those front and rear and a reversing camera, so very, very easy to maneuver. Visibility is also surprisingly good. Because you seem to sit quite far back in the car, it feels as if there's a lot of it in front of you. The A-pillar is totally unintrusive, and even your rear three-quarters, which often in cars like this can be compromised, is absolutely fine. It's only really the view behind that does feel somewhat claustrophobic. It's a very letterbox affair. I do personally feel like you sit just a touch too high in these seats. It looks as if you could drop them by about an inch, but I suppose Alpine set this as a reasonable compromise. And they kind of got it right, because earlier on I had someone 6'5" sit in this car, and though it was snug, they did fit. I think with the Comfort Option 6-way seats, they would be absolutely fine. But let's ignore all of that, shall we, and talk about not just the good stuff, but the sensational stuff. The ride of this car. It is absolutely unreal. Considering how firm it is around town, you would think when it came to a lumpy, bumpy road, it would be near unbearable. In fact, the opposite is true. The more demanding the road, the better this car gets. The harder you drive it, the softer and more supple it becomes. Best of all, this car's absolute happiest speed is around that at the British national speed limit. So depending on the section of road you're on, between sort of 50 and 80 mile an hour, that's where this car wants to be. I love the slightly over-enthusiastic animation for the gears as you move between them. Reminds me of the intro to Thunderbirds. 5, 4, you know the one. The steering is also absolutely delicious. Perhaps a little bit shy of that in something like an Elise, but certainly better than in the Alfa Romeo 4C. It still gives you texture, feedback, communicates to you, but also feels somewhat uncorrupted. It doesn't want to drag you off into the hedgerow at every given opportunity. It can sometimes feel as if the initial turn-in is just a little bit on the slow side, but that's not actually the case. What's happening instead is the car's allowing the suspension to weight up. It's not trying to stay resolutely flat the entire time. It's when you really start to press on, this car feels properly old school, because it begins to pitch, roll, move about. It tells you what's going on. You know how close to the limit you're getting. Grip on the whole is very good. The majority of the time I've had this car, it's been dry, though it has rained the last couple of days, and driven sensibly, I haven't had any issues at all. If you find the ESC in the car to be a touch on the restrictive side, that's what track mode is for. To get into that, simply hold the sport mode button a little longer. The dash will change once again to a slightly more outlandish display with a rev counter that in fact builds from two sides into the center with a big change-up light in the middle, and your traction control also moves into track mode. As you might imagine, that means it's no longer fully engaged, but likewise is not fully off either. The gear shift paddles do feel very nice in the hand, though I would prefer it if they weren't painted. Because of that, they can actually sometimes feel a little plasticky, though I don't believe that they are. I would like them to be maybe a touch bigger, but you couldn't do that with the upshift paddle, otherwise it would foul the silly little van-like volume control down here. Incidentally, one gripe I do have is that I noticed there isn't a physical volume control anywhere else in the car. Fine for me, because I can access this one. However, if you've got Android Auto on the go, there is no easy way to change your volume. There is no button around this screen or anything like that. If there is one, I haven't found it. Road noise I found on the whole to be pretty reasonable. The car is great for covering long distances. That's cool. Yeah, sorry about the beeping, but I don't actually know how to turn that parking sensor off. Most cars have a button to do that for when this happens. This is one of the little things about this car. This is one of the little things that you get to notice. Earlier in the video, I believe I mentioned that it seems Alpine has a real future. The reason I say that is because allegedly a deal has been done between themselves and Lotus to cooperate on a future project. That's very exciting because if anything, that could be the next Elise and also the next A110. I must confess, I would really love to see Alpine do something else. I'd love to see a bigger, meatier sports car, closer to, say, the Emira. I also would like to see them do a convertible, though I think it would be pretty much impossible with this for a couple of reasons. First off, if you look at the design of it, it doesn't seem as if there's anywhere for a soft top to go. And as people don't really want to put up with Targa panels anymore, you're kinda stuck. Secondly, I get the feeling, because of the fact this car doesn't have massive big sills like in an Elise, if you did chop the roof off, it might suffer quite a bit. And if this car lost its dynamic ability, well, it's lost its personality. I wouldn't want it. Fingers crossed they can come up with something soon though, because in the world of the sports car, a convertible is pretty much a necessity. There is though something else about the Alpine that it took me a few days to realise, and this I think ultimately is why I love it quite so much. When you take all of this car's strengths, the fact it's not ludicrously large, impossibly wide like say a 4C, the fact that it is brilliantly damped, particularly on poor roads like this, and the Alpine has done something rather amazing. It's made me a little bit more adventurous. You see, we all love the idea of a supercar, but anyone who's actually experienced one will tell you that there's a lot about the ownership experience which isn't quite so great. That includes the fact that when you're on a road like this, it can be a terrifying experience. You go through this section going, oh no, 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 please don't hit the ground, please don't hit the ground, please don't hit the ground, please don't hit the ground. And the Alpine, where in a Ferrari you'd be lifting, you're actually putting your foot down. That's magic. That's one of my most demanding test routes anywhere in the country, and this thing takes it brilliantly. If anything, the other car in my fleet that this most reminds me of is my Citroen BX, because that does a similar thing. Low speed seems a little harsher than you would expect. High speeds, magic carpet. Over the last couple of days, I've been driving quite a few different places, including some that I don't really go to all that often. And I've been using Google to navigate, which on occasion says, would you like to take this wiggly, windy little road that looks a little bit narrow and saves you 45 seconds? In any kind of supercar, the answer is always, no thank you, I'll only go down any road I've personally scouted 5 different times in 10 different cars before I approve it for driving in the Ferrari. This, though, you look at a road and go, that looks really twisty and bumpy and fun. I'll have a go at that, please. This is a car that makes me just want to get out there and explore. More importantly, it's just made a young lad very happy because he's seen it, given it the thumbs up, and I gave it a bit of beans for him, and he loved it. That is the mark of a great car. And if you're currently sat there mourning the Elise, maybe you wanted to have one, didn't get the opportunity to buy it new, or you've owned Elises for the last 20 years and you're wondering what to go for next, provided the whole lack of a convertible bit doesn't bother you, get this, seriously. And likewise, if you've got a visit to the Porsche dealer planned, you're thinking about buying a Cayman, but your budget isn't that generous, try one. Seriously, you won't regret it. But take my word for it, don't get the S. I want to try the S, I want to drive the S and have a bit of fun with it. If you do want to modify one of these, there's a lovely chap called Dave, runs a company called Life 110, and he's done quite a few things to them. But for me, if you were to put stiffer suspension on this, you're likely going to ruin what it's all about. So if you want more, get the GT. You get more power, but you get the same suspension, same ride comfort, just more luxuries and fripperies and things like that. But honestly, the base model, it's great. In fact, even the Focal stereo, which is a 500 odd pound upgrade, I actually really quite enjoy. I spent the other week with a £140,000 Audi RS e-tron with its Bang & Olufsen Bayo Sound 3D system. The stereo here produces better bass than the B&O, and the car rattles less when it does. Simple witchcraft. Anyway, if that hasn't convinced you to at least think about buying one of these, I don't know what will. So on that bombshell, I'm going home. the long way. Thanks to Alpine for lending me this car, and of course, as ever, thanks to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, particularly if you own one of these. I'd love to know your experiences, and make sure you've hit the subscribe button too. Even if you have, don't forget to check the bell icon so you'll be notified of every new video release. And whatever it is, I hope to see you there. Bye-bye.